Hello and welcome to IAMC Radio and Podcast. Today, we explore the top news headlines for May 8th. We've got quite a bit to cover, looking at some key events happening around the world.
Yes, there's a lot going on. We'll try to give you a clear overview of the main headlines and maybe touch on what's behind them.
Okay, let's start in West Africa. There's news concerning the Nigeria-Benin border, specifically the Seme border crossing.
That's right. The ECOWAS president, Umar Touré, visited and, well, he wasn't impressed. He described the infrastructure there as being in a deplorable state, which is worrying given ECOWAS has invested funds there.
Deplorable how? What specific things did he point out?
Well, the reports mention things like non-functional scanners, which is a pretty big deal for border security and trade. Also, inadequate lighting systems, problems with bridges, and even a lack of water in the offices. Basic stuff, really.
Wow, and the local officials confirmed this.
Yes, the Comptroller of Customs, Ben Oramalugo, confirmed the scanners haven't worked since February 12th. He also mentioned the lack of lighting for pedestrians makes it dangerous at night, leading to crime, apparently. No roofing in places, and they have to fetch water daily.
That paints a pretty grim picture. It definitely shows a gap between the investment and the reality on the ground.
Exactly. And Touré also brought up the issue of multiple checkpoints.
Ah, yes, a common complaint in the region, hindering free movement.
Precisely. Hindering free movement, which is, a cornerstone of ECOWAS. Plus, it creates opportunities for corruption. He insisted payments should only be made if they're receipted.
Which makes sense, but he did clarify, didn't he, that free movement doesn't mean no checks at all.
Correct. Proper documentation and security checks are still necessary. It's about streamlining, not eliminating controls.
Nigeria's representative to ECOWAS, Musa Nuhu, acknowledged this implementation gap too. But there's maybe some positive movement. President Tinubu reportedly approved a task force.
Yes, to tackle these multiple checkpoints, that's definitely something to watch to see if it makes a real difference. It highlights the challenge of making regional policy work locally.
Okay, let's shift focus to Eastern Europe, Russia and Ukraine. President Putin ordered a unilateral ceasefire for a few days.
Yeah, time for Moscow's Victory Day celebrations on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. But it was met with a lot of skepticism.
Understandably, I suppose. What was the reaction on the Ukrainian side?
Strong doubt. One soldier, Sergei, apparently just laughed it off, saying Thursday was just a typical day of fighting. Kiev officially called it political theatrics, basically accusing Russia of trying to ensure their parade in Moscow wasn't disrupted.
There was also that rejected proposal from U.S. President Trump for a longer ceasefire earlier, wasn't there?
That's right, a 30-day unconditional one, rejected. And Ukraine's foreign minister, Andriy Sybiga, claimed hundreds of Russian attacks occurred after this supposed truce started.
So fighting continued.
Reports from soldiers near Kramatorsk and Torets confirmed ongoing strikes, even infantry attacks. A drone unit commander described it as medium-intensity fighting. Business as usual, it seems.
It echoes past ceasefires, like the Easter one, where both sides accused the other of violations.
Exactly. After more than 3 years of war, the trust just isn't there. Ukrainians simply don't trust the Kremlin.
One soldier, Yuri, gave a pretty stark assessment, didn't he? Saying Ukraine couldn't win purely physically and needed pressure from all sides.
Yes, and even President Zelensky has conceded that diplomacy will be needed to get some territory back. It reflects a grim realism setting in.
But the determination is still there. Another soldier, Andreev, said, of course we are for peace, because we know what death is.
A very powerful statement. It captures that desire for peace amidst the ongoing struggle.
Okay, let's move back to Nigeria. An issue with a primary health center in Abuja, reported by Manatianyi.
Yes, this concerns a facility in Tugunbijimi in the Federal Capital Territory. It serves over 50 nomadic Fulani communities. And the situation sounds, well, critical. Near total collapse, according to the report.
What are the specific problems?
It's manned by just one single health worker. He's overwhelmed doing everything, seeing patients, handling drugs, cleaning, referrals, even fetching water.
One person for over 50 communities.
Apparently so. He spoke about rain pouring through the roof, doing his best alone. There's no electricity, no clean water. The only medical supplies provided are malaria drugs. He buys other medicines himself.
Out of his own pocket. And he has to travel for water.
Yes, 14 kilometers, sometimes walking just to get water. The report mentioned a father whose child had diarrhea, likely from unsafe water. It's dire.
Where do people go in an emergency?
Referrals go to Kagariko General Hospital, but that's 14 kilometers away in Kaduna State. The nearest FCT government facility is apparently over 50 kilometers away. A long journey.
And this is happening while the FCT's health budget is increasing significantly.
That's the jarring part. Billions of Naira budgeted N27.1 billion in 2023 and 40.2 billion in 2024, projected N52.5 billion for 2025, but it doesn't seem to be reaching places like Tugan Bajimi.
So Monarchy is calling for intervention.
Yes, urging Senator Iredi Kinkiv, FCT Minister Nyesom Waik, and the National Primary Healthcare Development Agency to step in. The message is clear. Rural communities can't be left behind. They deserve basic health care and dignity. It's a matter of justice, really.
Definitely. Now, for some more positive news from Nigeria, NAFDAC has made an announcement about locally made syringes.
Yes, this is quite significant. The NAFDAC Director General Mojisola Adai announced WHO pre-qualification for a specific syringe. It's a 0.5 milliliter auto-disable syringe made by Afromedical Manufacturing and Supplies Ltd., based in Ogun State.
And this is a first.
It is. They're the first local syringe maker in Nigeria and actually in West and Central Africa to get this WHO pre-qualification. It comes after a lot of work, investment, and support from NAFDAC itself.
That aligns with the government's push for local production.
Right. Absolutely. It fits right into President Tinubu's agenda. This pre-qualification means Afromedical can now bid for national and international supply contracts. WHO recognizes their manufacturing standards.
Does this relate to NAFDAC's import restriction policies?
It does. NAFDAC has the 5+5 policy, which limits imports of medicines and devices that can be produced locally to sufficient quality and quantity. This success strengthens that policy. NAFDAC's also been actively promoting Nigerian products internationally since achieving WHO Maturity Level 3 status itself.
What's Afromedical's capacity?
Their general manager mentioned the pre-qualification is a major milestone. They can produce around 1.8 billion syringes annually. It's a call, really, for Nigerians to embrace locally made medical products to boost the economy.
Good news indeed. Okay, a quick hop over to New Zealand. Still lots of sheep.
Ah, yes. The latest figures show about 23.6 million sheep to 5.3 million humans. So roughly 4.5 sheep per person.
Still high, but hasn't that ratio dropped?
It has, quite dramatically, actually. Back in 1982, it was supposedly 22 sheep per person. Falling wool prices and the shift to synthetic fibers are the main reasons humans are catching up.
The jokes will probably continue, though. Now, something more somber from South Africa, vulture poisoning in Kruger National Park.
Yes, very tragic. Over 120 endangered vultures died after feeding on a poisoned elephant carcass. Another 84 had to be rescued and treated.
Which species were affected?
Mainly white-backed vultures and Cape vultures, both endangered, and at least one critically endangered lappet-faced vulture, a huge loss.
Why poison them? Is it accidental?
It seems deliberate, sadly. Poachers use highly toxic agrochemical pesticides. They lace carcasses to kill vultures and lions, often for use in traditional medicine. This is the worst single incident since a massive poisoning in Botswana in 2019. Sometimes they poison bait directly. Sometimes they lace carcasses left after poaching other animals, like elephants.
And vultures are targeted because they alert rangers.
That's part of it. They act as natural sentinels, circling carcasses. Poachers see them as a nuisance. Plus, there's an increasing demand for lion parts, and vultures become collateral damage or are targeted maliciously.
Horrible. Okay, let's turn to tensions between Pakistan and India. Escalation after a missile strike.
Yes, a serious escalation. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif vowed that India will now have to pay the price. This follows a strike that Pakistan says killed 31 civilians and injured 46.
What's India's position?
India claimed responsibility, stating they targeted 9 terrorist infrastructure sites belonging to Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba. They insist no civilians were affected.
But Pakistan denies this.
Completely. They deny any militants were present and condemned India's justification. India referred to it as Operation Sindoor, following an earlier attack in Pahalgam.
Have there been military clashes?
Pakistan's military reported shooting down several Indian aircraft and intense firing along the line of control. It's a dangerous situation.
But what's the international reaction?
Calls for restraint. Former U.S. President Trump urged them to stop and offered help. The UN Secretary General, China, Russia, the UK, all calling for de-escalation. Malala Yousafzai also urged peace and dialogue.
Travel advisories issued.
Yes, the UK Foreign Office advised against travel near the border and warned about Jammu and Kashmir and Manipur.
Okay, back to Nigeria again. There seems to be some confusion regarding IMF debt. The presidency claimed it was cleared.
Yes, there were claims, but IMF data appears to contradict that. While Nigeria seems to have made its scheduled principal repayments on a 2020 loan, but according to IMF data published late April 2025, Nigeria still owes charges and interest. About SDR 125.99 million, which translates to roughly N274.66 billion. The IMF projections even show these payments continuing until 2029.
So the principal might be on track for repayment by 2025, but the interest and charges remain.
That's what the data suggests. And there's another layer. Sahara reporters citing CBN data reported Nigeria's IMF debt actually increased by N2.5 trillion in Naira terms in 2024 due to foreign exchange losses.
Doubling the local currency liability.
To around N5 trillion, yes. Because the Naira depreciated, the amount owed in local currency ballooned, even if the SDR amount didn't change as drastically.
So even if principal payments are met, the debt isn't fully cleared if charges and interest are outstanding.
Exactly. And the exchange rate issue significantly increases the burden on Nigeria's finances. Reports even highlighted massive debt servicing costs in January 2025, crowding out other spending.
All right, let's move to trade. A potential US-UK trade deal.
Reports suggest an announcement might be imminent, possibly Thursday, but it might just be a framework rather than a full deal. This would be the first such agreement since President Trump imposed those widespread tariffs back on April 2nd.
Trump hinted at something.
He tweeted about a major trade deal with a big and highly respected country. Meanwhile, British PM Keir Starmer is expected to give an update on trade talks.
The UK has been keen on a US deal post-Brexit.
Very keen. This could also complicate the EU's own trade talks with the US. Britain did recently secure a free trade agreement with India, though.
What might be in this US-UK framework?
Speculation includes the US potentially reducing some tariffs on British goods. In return, maybe the UK offers some relief from its digital services tax, which affects US tech giants. Interestingly, the UK didn't retaliate against Trump's tariffs initially. Some analysts suggest any deal now is likely more about damage limitation than a major economic win.
And the Bank of England might cut rates, partly due to tariff threats.
That's part of the analysis, yes. Starmer has visited Washington before to discuss these issues and even invited Trump for a state visit. Trump, of course, has ties to the UK through his mother and his golf course.
Okay, staying with the US, talks with Israel about post-war Gaza.
Yes, reports of high-level talks about a potential US-led temporary administration for Gaza after the conflict ends.
What would be the goal?
The idea is to stabilize and demilitarize Gaza before eventually handing it over to a, quote, viable Palestinian administration. But these are preliminary talks, no timeline fixed.
Is there a model for this?
It's being somewhat compared to the Coalition Provisional Authority in Iraq, though that faced significant backlash, so maybe not the best comparison. The plan would apparently involve inviting other countries to participate, but, crucially, excluding Hamas and the current Palestinian Authority.
That sounds politically complicated.
Yeah.
Significant U.S. involvement, too.
Hugely significant, potentially the biggest U.S. role in the Middle East since the Iraq War, and yes, likely to face political pushback. Both the State Department and Netanyahu's office declined to confirm the talks officially.
Any hints from officials?
Israel's Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar mentioned the possibility of an international trusteeship post-conflict, ruling out Israeli civil control. Hamas predictably rejects any foreign-led administration. The UAE had proposed an international coalition but conditioned it on PA inclusion and a path to statehood, which Israel opposes. All this while the death toll in Gaza remains tragically high.
And there are still those controversial ideas from some in Israel about relocation or settlements.
Yes, those ideas persist among Netanyahu's far-right allies. Some Israeli officials are also considering longer-term control strategies like security zones or military bases within Gaza. Very complex, very sensitive.
Finally, U.S.-China trade talks resuming.
Yes, officials are set to meet in Switzerland starting Saturday, May 9th, running to the 12th, aiming to de-escalate the trade dispute.
Who's leading the talks?
For the U.S., Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Chief Trade Negotiator Jamieson Greer. For China, economist He Lifeng.
Tensions have ramped up again under President Trump, haven't they?
They have, with new tariffs imposed U.S. tariffs up to 145% on some goods, China retaliating at 125%. It's damaging economically.
What's likely to be discussed?
Reducing those broader tariffs is expected to be key. Also, potentially removing tariffs on specific products and addressing the export control list. China agreed to meet, citing global expectations, their own interests, and appeals from U.S. businesses and consumers feeling the pinch.
But China remains cautious.
Their statement emphasized watching U.S. actions and rejecting coercion. But the meeting itself could be a step towards easing the standoff.
The U.S. justification for tariffs included things like fentanyl flow and unfair trade practices.
Correct. Criticizing China for not honoring past agreements, China, in turn, has called Trump's tariffs illegal and unreasonable. So, lots to potentially hash out in Switzerland.
So looking across the board today, from border management challenges in Africa and the harsh realities of war in Europe, to healthcare crises, trade negotiations, and geopolitical maneuvering in the Middle East.
It's a complex global picture.
It really is. These events, though geographically diverse, are often interconnected, highlighting the intricate nature of international relations and domestic challenges today. Understanding these threads is key. Thank you for listening to today's top news headlines on IAMC Radio and Podcast.